Hello everyone, it's NerdGasm. I am here to finally share my thoughts on the Resident Evil 4 remake. It's been out now for about 7 months, better late than never. As a quick disclaimer, this video isn't going to be as extensive as my other Resident Evil retrospectives have been, because I have already reviewed the original version of the game. If you'd like a deeper rundown on the story and characters in RE4, I suggest you check that video out first before watching this one. I don't have any interest in covering it all again here, there's no point. I'm only really going to be focusing on my overall thoughts on the remake, and the major differences between the two versions of the game I feel the need to address. That's about it. Oh, and if you haven't played Resident Evil 4 before, in either of its forms, then obviously know that I will be skimming over a few spoilers in the game. You have been warned. Okay, so I had mentioned in my video looking at the original game that Resident Evil 4 revolutionized the third-person shooter, survival horror, and action genres, influencing many other games that would come out in the ensuing years. It's still widely regarded as one of the best Resident Evil games, and one of the greatest video games ever made, period. While I was blown away by the pacing in that first chunk of the story in the village, some of the most atmospheric and tense any of the RE games have ever gotten, in my opinion, when I reached Salazar Castle and later the island, I couldn't help but admit that my initial thoughts on the game had been tarnished. I was hesitant to be so bold and call it overrated, but I was finding myself enjoying it less and less. I was becoming disengaged with it in many ways. The original version of Resident Evil 4, despite its massive critical and commercial success, ended up becoming one of my least favorite entries in the RE series, at least from a narrative perspective. The remake, however, has changed all of that. Resident Evil 4 has now become one of my favorite installments, and the remake, I believe, is the definitive way to play and experience this story. The graphics are obviously superior, the quality of life upgrades to the gameplay and combat are wonderful, with a satisfying new parry mechanic to block incoming projectiles and melee attacks, and improvements have been made to the puzzles as well, adding more variety to them and making them more intuitive and exciting to sit through. One of the biggest issues I had with the original game was its inconsistent tone. The first few hours were scary, but once you reached the castle, things started to become too silly, too campy, and too action-heavy for the most part. The atmosphere has been immensely improved throughout the entire remake. Everything is much darker, the enemy AI has been made more aggressive, and their designs are more disturbing looking. The layouts of the environments you fight them in have been overhauled. For example, I love the one with the Garrador in the castle's dungeon. It tracks sound, and you have to carefully navigate yourself through the chains that are hanging down from the ceiling. The pacing in the remake is much stronger than it was in the original game. Terrifying sequences like the ones with the Regenerators are given even more time to gestate, more time to breathe, in their case quite literally, as the fuckers wheezing on and off screen still give me nightmares. Some sections that came off as a bit awkward in the original, like the U3 boss battle and the fight that took place in that cage in the castle, have either been replaced with cinematics or have been eliminated altogether for the benefit of the story. I prefer these changes. They only make the game's narrative stronger and more refined. Protecting Ashley is no longer a chore anymore. She feels more competent than she had been before. You can have her stay close when you want to run past enemies, or tell her to stay behind, even hide if need be. When she's damaged, she falls on the ground, and you have to walk over and pick her back up before she is killed. You also don't have to worry about sharing healing items with her, or upgrading her health along with Leon's, which gets rid of that annoyance. She can still be carried away and you can game over by it, but the challenge feels fair now, far less frustrating. I also love when you get to play as her to save Leon in the castle. That section has been expanded. The blue flame of her lantern temporarily freezes enemies, sort of like Rose's mold powers in the DLC of Resident Evil Village. Evading the suits of armor that have been brought to life with the Plagueis as Ashley, or fighting them head-on as Leon, is tons of fun. The knights were in the original version of RE4, but here, much like so many other elements of this remake, the visual enhancements do wonders for them, making them far spookier as they stumble towards you. In the original, their movements were a lot smoother looking. Just like the very best Resident Evil games, the RE4 remake maintains its scares, finding new ways to unsettle you from start to finish. While it does still inject some silly and exaggerated action-heavy stuff from time to time, like Leon parrying a chainsaw with a knife or backflipping off of a wall, they don't take you out of the experience like the ones in the original game did. I think the main reason for this is because the rest of the world is made so much more grounded and believable. The characters have been written a lot stronger, are no longer shallow, walking cliches. Ashley doesn't feel as much like a cutesy damsel in distress. She's able to hold her own a lot better now, has that fighting spirit and vigor to her. Leon isn't just your stereotypical action hero, a stoic wall of toughness lacking any and all emotion. He feels like flesh and bone, and his relationship with Ashley is what it should have always been. He's sent to protect her, but the two develop a strong bond. He helps boost her confidence, calm her down after intense and traumatic situations. They make jokes with one another and help motivate and give praise when the other succeeds. The two become close friends. And while Ashley does flirt with Leon a few times, it's never made too obvious or crosses any uncomfortable lines like it did in the original game. Their relationship never goes beyond what it should. It develops in a more natural and likable way in the remake, and it's probably my favorite aspect of the new game, in all honesty, if I were to pick just one. And because you are so firmly invested in their relationship and who they are as characters now, that makes all of the instances where Ashley is captured again by the villains even more impactful and engaging. They serve the purpose they should have had in the original game, but didn't, because I found Ashley to be so annoying and the interaction she had with Leon to be too cookie-cutter and plain. The side characters in the RE4 remake are all written stronger too, and are introduced in more compelling ways. Louise's backstory has more depth to it, making his redemption arc greater than it was before. You get to spend a lot more time with him, taking on Ganados, the pair of El Gigantes that can be dropped in the lava, fighting your way through the Novistador nest, and riding in minecarts and battling adjacent enemies like something out of Indiana Jones, one of the more entertaining sequences in the game. Louise survives a lot longer in the story, and this time, his death comes at the hands of Jack Krauser instead of the main baddie Osmond Saddler. Some fans have taken offense to this, believing Saddler to be a weaker character than he was in the original, but I didn't think it damaged him in the slightest. He was never one of my favorites in the series to begin with, but Saddler was still intimidating and creepy in the remake. While he wasn't featured in as much of the game as he was in the original, this gave the other three antagonists a chance to rise up to his level. You have 4 equally interesting villains now, all spaced out throughout the sections of the game. The village chief is still awesome. You even get an extra part where you and Ashley are running from him, Mr. X and Nemesis style, which is cool. The nobleman Ramon Salazar was the villain I liked the least from the original. I found him to be too goofy looking. Some of his dialogue was strange, and he stood out like a sore thumb from the rest of the villains in this franchise. But now I find him to be much scarier. He's lost the hat, but something about him just fits the tone of the rest of the game now. It works. And I love how he communicates with you using these gramophone, phonograph-like pipes and speakers throughout his castle, instead of just hacking the comms Leon was using to speak to Hunnigan with. That didn't make as much sense to me. And bringing up Louise's death again, the fact that Krauser is the one to do it fuels the rivalry between Leon and Krauser even more. I feel like Krauser was a bit underdeveloped in the original game, since so much of what had happened between him and Leon, his entire backstory, was off-screen. Speaking of issues with things happening off-screen, I mentioned in my review of the original game that Ada's role in the story was kinda confusing. It didn't reference the events of Resident Evil 2, her supposed death, as much as it should have, but in the remake, her appearance feels a lot more natural. Raccoon City is effectively addressed, the distrust Leon has towards her as a result of what happened. RE4 acts as a solid continuation of RE2 now, far better than the original did. Before I end this video, I want to go through a few odds and ends in quick-fire succession. Aside from the timed parrying with your knife, the odd dodge prompts here and there, or mashing a single button to escape a grapple, mercifully, all the more awkward and dated cinematic QTEs that were in the original game have been removed. All of the enemy redesigns are superior in the remake, except for maybe the Calmillos. Something about their big Cheshire Cat smiles look humorous and cartoony to me, not scary. The mysterious merchant character returns. The shop, upgrades, and inventory system have all been upgraded to fit more in line with what was in Resident Evil 8. I like the charms you can attach to your case to give it additional effects, like increasing the amount of ammo you can craft, how much health you receive from healing items, and discounts you can get when buying weapons. You can earn bronze, silver, and gold coins at the merchant's shooting range to win even more charms from a prize machine. The charm effects can stack, and you can keep adding to your collection with each new playthrough of the story. It is fun trying to collect them all, but it is a random game of chance as to which ones you end up getting, which might infuriate some players. They're bonus effects anyways. You don't need them to play the game. They're just there if you want them. The recently released Separate Ways DLC that has you play as Ada Wong might have benefited even more than the base game did with all these remake enhancements. I enjoyed playing through it just as much, if not more so, than I did the main story as Leon. Using her unique weapons, charms, and hookshot grapple gun was a lot of fun to reach higher vantage points or cross over large gaps. It also allowed Ada to rip shields away from enemies or zip into them to deliver devastating strikes. The content removed from the main game we all thought was taken out mostly due to pacing reasons had actually been deliberately saved for Ada by Capcom, giving her story just as many memorable moments as Leon's. We got to return to locations such as that underground waterway, the caves with the stone pillars slamming down that you can use to take out enemies, and even the hallway with those lasers makes its triumphant return. I hate to say it, but the laser hallway was one of the dumbest sequences in the original game. I found it to be too silly and excessive, but having Ada deal with the lasers instead of Leon in the remake is a lot more fitting, and there's actual context behind their existence now, which is even better. Ada discovers an invulnerable Plagueis Amber experiment in the lab she infiltrates that chases her. This thing is really creepy. I was very unsettled when it showed up, wasn't expecting it. The only way to kill it is by dodging these powerful lasers and redirecting them at the creature to slice it into pieces. I think we would all agree that the greatest section added back in was the battle against the human-insect hybrid, the U3, dubbed Pacenta in the game. She was an unnamed housekeeper of Salazar's, experimented on and transformed into a monster, one of Salazar's robed bodyguards that stalks you throughout the DLC, sometimes within Plagueis-induced hallucinations, caused by a parasite that gets inside Ada. You take on two different forms of the Pacenta in a cave. The weird suspended container area from the original game is still gone, but that's fine by me. It was janky as hell compared to the fight you had with it in the cave itself. This boss encounter is much stronger in the remake, in my opinion. I think it's essential for anyone who has Resident Evil 4 to purchase its inexpensive Separate Ways add-on, because it boosts the whole experience of the game tenfold. Ada's side of the story is vital, holding a lot of what happens in RE4 together, and setting up the events that will transpire in the series moving forward. You get to see a lot more of Albert Wesker. He sends Ada after a vial of amber and has her arm explosives that will destroy Sadler's Island. She ends up sabotaging the detonation and forces the pilot of the helicopter sent to pick her up to change course when she learns Wesker's intention to wipe out billions of lives with the amber. While implied in the original game, the remake clearly shows us that Wesker obtains the mutated body of Krauser to extract a sample of the dominant species Plaga from it. On his boat, he says the age of man will soon come to an end, and smirks. I can't wait for a remake of Resident Evil 5. You know it's on the way. All in all, the remake of Resident Evil 4 is on par with the remake of 2 in my opinion. It might even be the most effective of all the remakes, following the release of Separate Ways, that tied everything together nicely. RE4 has become one of my favorite installments in the franchise, and one I will surely revisit numerous times in the future. There's only one more Resident Evil video planned for Halloween this year on my channel, but whenever new games come out, I will take delight in reviewing them in detail if you want me to. I will wait a few months after their releases, so I don't have to worry too much about spoilers, but I promise I will cover them. Resident Evil has become one of my favorite video game franchises. I can't seem to get enough of it. In regards to covering any more past games, the only one I wanted to get to was Resident Evil 0. I don't have any interest in looking at the others. However, seeing as the remake of Resident Evil 3 is my personal favorite in the series, it's action-packed with a lot of underappreciated replay value on harder difficulties due to the varied enemy types and placements of them, not to mention the fun bonus items you can equip to yourself, and I am aware of the differences it has from the original version of it, released in 1999. I think at some point I will want to try that one. I feel like I have to. It's my obligation as a fan of RE3 to play its initial version. I want to thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please think about subscribing and showing your support for all it is that I do. You can even become a producer on Patreon and nominate future video topics for me to cover. I will see you all in the next one. As always, take care of yourselves, and long live your inner nerd.